Georgia Williams was a bright light in everyone's life. Born on September 7th, 1995, in Telford, Shropshire, England, Georgia was the youngest of two siblings. Her older sister was named Scarlett. Her parents, Lynette and Steve Williams, raised their girls in a home full of love and laughter. Georgia was lively, outgoing, and cheeky in the most endearing way. She loved pulling little pranks on Scarlett, harmless, funny ones that made everyone laugh. She was deeply family-oriented, always finding ways to make those around her feel loved and cared for. More than anything, Georgia was empathetic. She had a special way of sensing when someone was sad or left out, and she would go out of her way to lift them up, to make them feel like they mattered. Honestly, I think people like Georgia are rare. The ones who carry so much light inside them that they can't help but share it with everyone around them. But life hadn't always been easy for her. During her years in primary school, Georgia was bullied. Her mother, Lynette, offered to step in, to call the school, to have her move to another class. But Georgia, even as a child, was strong. "No, Mom, I can handle this myself," she said. And she did. When she moved up to high school, the dynamic flipped completely. Georgia became popular. Not the mean, exclusive kind of popular, but the kind that drew people in with kindness. She made a lot of friends. She was respected, loved. She even became head girl at her school, a title given to someone who embodied leadership, compassion, and responsibility. Outside of school, Georgia pursued her dreams with the same passion. She joined the Air Cadets, training with the hope of one day becoming an RAF paramedic. A future full of promise stretched out ahead of her. When Georgia turned 17, she took a part-time job at a local petrol station. There, she quickly made friends with all of her coworkers, because that's just who she was. The kind of person who made you feel welcome the moment you met her. But there was one employee who didn't quite fit in. A 22-year-old man named Jamie Reynolds. While most of the staff were close, Jamie often seemed like the outsider. Awkward, quiet, left out. Georgia noticed, because of course she did. And being who she was, she made sure to include him. She invited him into conversations, made him feel part of the group. Over time, they became friends. Good friends, actually, but for Jamie Reynolds, it quickly became more. He developed feelings for Georgia, feelings that went beyond friendship. Time and time again, he asked her out on dates, asked her to be his girlfriend. And every time, Georgia let him down gently. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't dismissive. She told him kindly that she wasn't looking for a relationship, that she preferred the friendship they had. And Jamie, outwardly, at least, seemed to accept that. He respected her wishes, smiled, stayed close, or so it seemed. When Jamie Reynolds turned 23, he confided in Georgia about something weighing on him. He told her he wasn't happy working at the petrol station anymore, that it didn't feel like a real future, just a dead-end job that he didn't want to be stuck in for the rest of his life. Georgia, being who she was, sat down with him. She listened. She cared. Together, they talked through his hobbies, the things that made him excited, that lit him up inside. And Jamie mentioned photography. He had a real interest in it. Something creative, something that felt different from the routine of his everyday life. Georgia, always the encourager, urged him to pursue it. Told him he should follow his passions, build something better for himself. And then Jamie asked her for a favor. Would she model for him? Would she help him start building a professional portfolio? Without hesitation, Georgia said yes. She wanted to help her friend. She wanted to be supportive like she always was. They set a date, Sunday, May 26th, 2013. The plan was simple. Georgia would go over to Jamie's house, his parents' house, actually where he still lived, and have a little photo shoot. Jamie said a few of his other friends would be there too, helping out, making it more casual and relaxed. It was supposed to be nothing more than a creative afternoon among friends. But that morning, Georgia almost changed her mind. Her family was hosting a big barbecue. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone was there. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of food, the kind of warm, simple happiness that you don't want to walk away from. And for a moment, Georgia considered staying where it was safe, where she was surrounded by the people who love her most. But Jamie's house was just 5 minutes down the road. It wouldn't take long, she thought. She would help her friend, like she had promised, then come right back to the barbecue, back to her family. That evening, Georgia went upstairs to get ready. She did her makeup with care, pulling her hair up into a neat, playful ponytail. She wore a leather jacket and a pair of jeans. Simple, stylish, effortlessly cool. When she came downstairs, ready to head out for the photo shoot, her father, Steve, looked up at her and smiled. "You look beautiful," he said. "You look just like Sandy from Greece." It was the last thing he said to her before she walked out the door. It was 7:30 p.m. Georgia set off on the short, 5-minute walk to Jamie Reynolds' house, her heart probably light, thinking it would just be a quick shoot with a friend she trusted. But hours passed, and Georgia didn't come home. Around 10:30 p.m., Lynette, her mother, started to get worried. It had been 3 hours, longer than expected. So she sent Georgia a text, just casually asking when the photo shoot was going to wrap up, how long she planned on being out. At first, there was no reply, but then a text came through from Georgia's phone. She said the photo shoot had ended a while ago, and she had been out with some friends ever since. She added her usual sign-off, 3 little kisses, as if everything was fine. As for when she'd be home, Georgia said she didn't know. Probably late. "Don't wait up for me," she told them. Georgia had always been sensible. She wasn't the kind of teenager to sneak around or rebel. She was responsible, trustworthy, the kind of daughter every parent hopes for. And so, reassured by her message, Lynette and Steve went to bed, trusting that their girl would come home safe. But when they woke up the next morning, Georgia's bed was still empty. Concern creeping deeper into her chest, Lynette texted her again at around 6 a.m., asking where she had been when she was coming home. An hour and a half later, at 7:30 a.m., another text finally arrived. Georgia said she had ended up staying over at a friend's house and had forgotten to let her mom know. She apologized, said her phone was low on battery, so if she stopped replying, that would be the reason. Honestly, I think every parent wants to believe their child when they say something like that. You want to trust them. You want to believe that everything is fine. But deep down, sometimes you can feel when something is very, very wrong. The exact wording of that text message, the one that arrived at 7:30 a.m., was chilling in hindsight. "My phone battery is dying too." It seemed innocent at the time, a simple explanation for why she might go silent. But later, that small detail would turn out to be incredibly significant, because it wasn't Georgia who sent that message. It was someone else, someone pretending to be her, someone trying to buy time. That Monday, May 27th, the day after Georgia had walked out the door for the last time, was supposed to be special. Georgia had plans to attend a music festival with her friends, something she had been looking forward to for weeks. So when she didn't come home that day, her parents, trying desperately to cling to normal explanations, assumed that maybe she had just gone straight to the festival after staying over at a friend's house. It made sense. It was easier to believe that than to face the creeping dread they tried to push down. And besides, they told themselves Georgia would definitely be home by Tuesday morning. She had her first ever driving lesson scheduled that day, and she had been so excited, talking about it for days, maybe even dreaming of the freedom that driving would bring. Georgia wouldn't miss that. Not for anything. Steve, her dad, tried to reason with himself. Maybe, just maybe, this was her first taste of rebellion. Maybe after 17 years of being the sensible, trustworthy daughter, Georgia was finally having her moment of teenage defiance. Ignoring the rules, pushing boundaries, trying to find herself. Honestly, I think any parent would want to believe that, because it's easier, far easier, to believe your child is being rebellious than to imagine something much, much worse. But deep down, the unease wouldn't go away, because this wasn't like Georgia. Not all. And soon, the truth would come crashing down around them. By Monday evening, Steve and Lynette Williams were desperate. They stayed up late, pacing, checking the windows, checking the door, waiting for Georgia to come home. But the house stayed quiet. Her bedroom stayed empty. They kept trying her phone, but now it wasn't even ringing anymore. It went straight to voicemail. Maybe they told themselves her battery had died, just like she said. Or maybe her phone had been switched off. Still clinging to hope, they started calling around. They reached out to all of Georgia's friends, asking the same questions over and over. "Have you seen Georgia? Is she with you? Did she tell you where she was going?" But one by one, the answers came back no. No one had seen or heard from her. And when Tuesday morning came, and Georgia didn't show up for her first ever driving lesson, the one she had been so excited for. Her parents knew. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was very, very wrong. They reported Georgia missing to the police immediately. They told the officers everything they knew, which, heartbreakingly, wasn't much. All they could say was that she had gone to a photo shoot at Jamie Reynolds' house. They didn't know the names of any other friends. They didn't know where she had been afterward. So the police started with the only lead they had, Jamie Reynolds. When they ran a background check on him, they found something deeply disturbing. Back in 2008, Jamie had been caught by police attempting to strangle a teenage girl. And unbelievably, he had only been given a warning. No arrest, no charge, no real consequences. He had been let go, back into the world, free to grow darker, to escalate. Immediately, Jamie Reynolds became a person of interest, if not an outright suspect. Police went to his house. When they arrived, the place was dark. No lights, no car in the driveway, no answer at the door. So they forced entry. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. No sign of Jamie, no sign of Georgia. They searched the rooms quickly but thoroughly, still nothing. Jamie Reynolds had vanished, and so had Georgia. A manhunt began almost immediately. Police checked the petrol station where both Georgia and Jamie worked, but neither had shown up for their shifts. Their co-workers hadn't heard a word from them. When police contacted Jamie's parents, who were away on holiday at the time, they provided the registration number of the family's van, which was missing. It was likely that Jamie was driving it. Now the search has expanded beyond Shropshire. Police broadcast the van's details across the entire UK, because after 2 days, Jamie could be anywhere. And he was nearly 280 miles away, across the border in Glasgow, Scotland, running from something, or maybe trying to hide what he had already done. In Scotland, Jamie Reynolds was finally found. He had checked himself into a cheap hotel in Glasgow, trying to disappear, trying to buy time. The Glasgow police moved fast. They arrested him, but there was no sign of Georgia. Because the case technically belonged to Shropshire police, the Glasgow officers could only ask him one question: "Where is Georgia?" And Jamie, cold, detached, simply replied, "I don't know, sir." Meanwhile, as Jamie was being transported back down to Shropshire for full questioning, local officers had to face the unbearable task of updating George's family. They told Steve, Lynette, and Scarlett the words no family ever wants to hear. It's not looking good. Lynette collapsed onto the floor, screaming and sobbing uncontrollably. Steve ran outside and threw up. Scarlett canceled everything she had planned for the foreseeable future. The family, who had once lived a life full of laughter, full of plans, was now completely shattered. And the horror was only just unfolding. Back at Jamie Reynolds' home, now treated as a full crime scene, police began a much deeper search. In his room, they found a camera. Inside it, an SD card. All the files had been deleted, but that didn't stop them. Police recovered everything, and what they uncovered was beyond anything they were prepared for. Hundreds of photographs. At first, normal. Georgia, smiling awkwardly, just like Jamie had promised her, just like any ordinary photo shoot. He had lured her that far with trust. But then, the images changed. Georgia was suddenly naked. Her expression, no longer casual, was distressed, full of fear. There were pictures of her with a rope around her neck. Photographs showing the moment she was hanging, lifeless. Jamie had documented everything. And it didn't stop there. Jamie then took her body down. He rearranged her, moving her from room to room, posing her in every imaginable position, taking hundreds of photographs as he went. And then, in the most chilling, inhuman act, he sexually assaulted George's body, again and again, photographing everything. Honestly, I think it's almost impossible to comprehend the level of premeditation, the absolute absence of humanity. He didn't just kill Georgia Williams. He desecrated her. He turned the last moments of her life and everything that came after into a twisted fantasy he could relive over and over again. The deeper the police dug into Jamie Reynolds' life, the darker everything became. Inside his home, they searched his computers, hard drives, and hidden files. And what they found was almost beyond belief. A collection of 16,800 images and 72 videos, all of it depicting the most extreme, most violent kinds of pornography imaginable. not just explicit material, but fetishes of rape, snuff films where real people were murdered, tortured, dehumanized. Images and videos that glorified suffering. It wasn't a curiosity. It wasn't a phase. It was an obsession, one he had been feeding for years. By now, Jamie Reynolds' parents had rushed back home from their holiday, desperate to understand what their son had done and how it had been allowed to happen. They sat down with the police and told them the truth. They explained that they had caught Jamie watching violent, extreme pornography when he was just 14 years old. That's the earliest they knew, but there was every possibility that it had started even earlier. At the time, they did what they thought they could. They didn't take away his laptop. He needed it for schoolwork. Instead, they called their internet provider and had filters and blocks installed. They thought it was enough. They thought they had closed the door. But Jamie had already found another way. At just 14 years old, he secretly called a private internet company and arranged for his own personal Wi-Fi, an unmonitored, unrestricted connection that his parents knew nothing about. He paid for it himself, month after month. For nearly 10 years, he kept that dark, hidden world alive, right under his parents' roof. Honestly, I think it's one of the most chilling realities of this case. The idea that even when the people around him tried to intervene, tried to pull him back from the edge, the darkness inside Jamie Reynolds had already taken root. He had built himself a private world of violence and death, and in the end, he dragged an innocent girl into it. Meanwhile, Jamie Reynolds' parents lived under the tragic illusion that they had solved the problem. They thought that once they installed internet filters, once they blocked those sites, Jamie had stopped. For nearly a decade, they believed their son had moved on, that the darkness they had glimpsed when he was 14 had somehow faded away. But behind their backs, Jamie had been watching those things the entire time, feeding the same violent fantasies, growing more obsessed with each passing year. When Jamie was first caught watching extreme content as a teenager, his parents did more than just install filters. They also reported him to the police, to social services. They were concerned, terrified even. They hoped that someone in authority would step in, would recognize the warning signs, and would help them save their son before it was too late. But back then, because what Jamie was viewing wasn't technically illegal to watch, no real action was taken. It didn't matter that it was violent. It didn't matter that it was disturbing. As long as it fell just inside the blurry lines of legality, there was nothing the authorities could do. They couldn't arrest him. They couldn't force treatment. All they could do was nothing. Honestly, I think that is one of the most heartbreaking failures in this entire case. The signs were there. The warnings were clear. And yet Jamie Reynolds was left to spiral deeper into the darkness, unwatched, unchecked, until finally, he acted out the horrors he had spent years feeding inside his mind. And Georgia Williams paid the price. As the search of Jamie Reynolds' home continued, police uncovered even more chilling evidence of how deeply rooted his fantasies were. Hidden away in drawers and cabinets, they found notepads, dozens of them. Inside were over 40 handwritten stories, each one describing in horrifying detail the rape, torture, and murder of women. Each story was graphic, violent, and disturbingly personal. But among them, one stood out, a story titled, Georgia Williams, A Surprise. It wasn't fiction. It was exactly what Jamie had done to Georgia, step by step. And investigators quickly realized he had written it before he committed the crime. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was premeditated, planned, scripted. Jamie had mapped out Georgia's final moments on paper and then made them real. Alongside the stories, police also found drawings, horrific sketches of women being strangled, hanged, asphyxiated. He had even printed out photographs of real women he knew in his actual life, colleagues, acquaintances, and defaced them, adding ropes around their necks, violent injuries, scenes of death. This wasn't just fantasy anymore. It was obsession. It was preparation. Meanwhile, during his police interrogations, Jamie Reynolds sat calmly, coldly. He maintained his innocence, flatly denied everything, as if the evidence didn't exist, as if Georgia wasn't gone. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no care for what he had done, or for the devastation he had caused Georgia's family. Honestly, I think that silence, that emptiness, is almost as chilling as the crime itself. It showed that Jamie Reynolds wasn't just a murderer. He was utterly disconnected from the human suffering he created. Despite his denials, the police had enough to formally charge him with George's murder. But there was still one unbearable, urgent task left: finding George's body. And Jamie, heartlessly, refused to say where she was. He gave them nothing, no hints, no clues. And so, the police had to trace his steps themselves. They began reconstructing Jamie's movements on the Monday morning, the hours after he killed Georgia Williams, hoping it would lead them to the place where he had hidden her. Police began piecing together Jamie Reynolds' movements after Georgia disappeared. It didn't take long before they caught him on CCTV. There he was, calmly filling up his van at a local petrol station. What the cameras couldn't see, but what everyone now knew, was that George's body was inside that van, just feet away from him. She had been with him the entire time. After filling up, Jamie drove 60 miles to a place called Wrexham. There, he parked the van in a cinema car park. And then, unbelievably, he left George's body in the van and went inside to watch a movie. It's almost unbearable to think about, because earlier, when Jamie had still been pretending to be her friend, he had asked Georgia out several times, specifically to the cinema. He had asked her to go see movies together, and each time, Georgia had politely declined. One of the very last times he asked her, he had invited her to see the new Fast and Furious movie that had just come out. And like always, Georgia had kindly said no. But after killing her, after taking away her life, Jamie made sure he got that date anyway. Even if it meant leaving her lifeless body in the van outside while he sat in a dark cinema, pretending that he hadn't destroyed everything. Honestly, I think that moment, him sitting there, eating popcorn maybe, watching a movie while Georgia lay dead in the parking lot, is one of the most grotesque images of how detached Jamie Reynolds had become from reality, from decency, from humanity. After the cinema, Jamie got back in his van and drove on. But for a while, police lost track of him. He vanished from CCTV. So a public appeal was put out. Anyone who had seen Jamie Reynolds or his van between Wrexham and Scotland was urged to come forward. And unbelievably, it worked. Several people reported seeing Jamie. Specifically, they remembered seeing him on a mountain pass in North Wales, a remote, muddy area surrounded by woods. It wasn't just a brief sighting either. Jamie's van had actually gotten stuck in the mud, and several Good Samaritans had stopped to help him, spending enough time with him that they later recognized both Jamie and the van. For the investigators, it was clear Jamie had a dead body in the back of his van. He had no reason to be in the middle of the woods, unless he was looking for a place to hide what he had done. And now, they finally had a direction to search. They finally had a chance to bring Georgia home. A full search was launched across the mountain pass. Police combed through every inch of the wooded areas surrounding the road, through mud, through trees, through silence thick with dread. And then, they found her. They found the naked body of Georgia Williams, hidden away, discarded like something disposable. But she was never disposable. She was a daughter, a sister, a light. George's body was carefully, respectfully brought back to Shropshire. And when it came time for the family to see her, to say goodbye, her father, Steve Williams, made a heartbreaking decision. He would not allow any family member, other than George's mother Lynette, to see her. It was too painful. It was too cruel. Steve said, in later interviews, his voice breaking, that he couldn't bear for anyone else to see Georgia that way. He wanted them to remember her as she was in life, laughing, vibrant, full of dreams, not as she was in death. Because that wasn't Georgia, and that's not how she deserved to be remembered. Meanwhile, back in custody, Jamie Reynolds continued his cold facade. He maintained his innocence, claiming he had nothing to do with George's murder, even as the evidence against him stacked up higher and higher. But then, on the first day of his trial, everything changed. Jamie stood up in court and pleaded guilty. There would be no drawn-out trial, no attempt at justification, no lies. He confessed. He admitted to killing Georgia Williams. He admitted to taking those hundreds of horrific photographs. The judge who oversaw the case didn't mince his words. He described Jamie Reynolds as a potential serial killer, a man so dangerous, so lacking in empathy, that if he were ever released, he would almost certainly kill again. And so, Jamie Reynolds was sentenced to a whole life tariff. No possibility of parole, no minimum sentence, no second chances. At just 23 years old, Jamie Reynolds became one of the youngest people in British history to receive a whole life sentence. He will die in prison, and the world will be safer for it. But Georgia's story doesn't end in tragedy alone. In her memory, her family created the Georgia Williams Trust, a charity dedicated to funding outdoor activities for children, because Georgia had always believed in the power of adventure. The way the outdoors could broaden your horizons, lift your spirits, make you believe in life's possibilities again. The trust hasn't just helped thousands of children find that spark. It's helped her family too, giving them a way to heal, to connect, to carry on living. Honestly, I think that's the most beautiful legacy of all. That even in the face of unspeakable cruelty, Georgia's light continues to shine. Not through grief, not through anger, but through hope.